Welcome to another episode of the Asian Cards podcast and YouTube channel. Today we have a very special guest, my friend Gary. How's it going, Gary?
Hey, pretty good. How are you?
I am doing well. Love the Costco background.
Yeah, it's the best. Costco keeps the cost low, as they say. Gotta
That's
stay
funny.
loyal, especially in these times.
That's funny. That's funny. So you know, guessing for those of you who haven't met Gary before, can you maybe give a little bit of background about yourself, both professionally as well as from a collector's angle?
Yeah. So my name's Gary Mao. So I would consider my home. Grew up in the big Bay Area. In a way, I would be one of those kind of like obnoxious Warriors fans, right? And we deservedly think so, even though we're kind of we're definitely a part of the haves, right? And super resource, but obviously like going through all of the painful days, like even like pre-we believe when we're just making bad draft pick after bad draft pick, right? Like, but my background spans a bunch, like everything from early days in the bubble tea industry, just doing like bubble tea shops, to working at McKinsey as a consultant, to later on doing more recently doing crypto mining, and then now kind of building my own kind of better metaverse company. Uh, and obviously, like, big reason kind of we're talking is also run a collectibles fund, specifically uh, investing for the long term in both like traditional collectibles, like, trading cards, both sports and otherwise, and also, NFT metaverse types things. So essentially just digital collectibles, right? So what is the assets that, let's say, me and you feel about cards, like what is the younger generation in the future going to be start thinking about and wanting to collect and consume. Yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell. A little bit crypto blockchain now, and a little bit like collectibles, you could say. But collectibles has been my lifelong hobby, right? Like as long as I've known basketball, it probably actually, I would say, is the way I got into watching sports at all, was through the cards first.
So how did you get into the hobby?
I got in the hobby because, like, I think in the early days, my friends, in high school and like in middle school, they were way bigger. I mean, even if you just look at me, I'm not by no means an athletic person. I think nobody will mistake me for any kind of athlete. So I wasn't even, into sports period back in like junior high days. And that was in the 2000s, basically early 2000s. Um, oh, before that. So like about like 95, 96 period.
Right.
But all my friends were. And so we used to, these days, I think like with the internet, there's so much cooler things to do. But, when we had free time, we used to hang out at Target. And Target, right? Like I think for a lot of people of my age, that's kind of one of the core hobby zones, right? For buying cards. And back then there's two hobby shops actually around town. I think back then, like LCSs were super common in the Bay Area. There was one called uh there's one called Legend Sports Cards.
Legends.
And then there's another one called Hobby World. And that's kind of another place that we always used to hang out. When people used to get into fights, they always used to meet outside of Hobby World to just like, lightly beat each other up.
Yeah.
But I used to just hang out with them and you just watch them rip, right? And like they're ripping. And so when I really started watching them, or they started doing it on a regular basis, like every day after school, was literally in 96. So, that was my entry into the hobby, was like Kobe year. Like, well, basically at that time, to be honest, we weren't thinking about Kobe. It was like Iverson, like Marbury, Ray Allen, like that group. And then like Sharif, because like, we were like all Cal fans over here. So watching them rip in the beginning was kind of what pulled me in. Like the gambling nature, obviously it's a gateway drug. It pulls you into fantasy sports and all that kind of stuff. And, along the way, it's kind of evolved, I think. My friends are still super degenerates. They love ripping and now have evolved into like all the different ways you could play like group breaks. But then for me along the way, like I think as I've grown older, I've been much more kind of just collecting, right? Like just picking certain themes or players and just trying to build out, I guess, what like tell a nice story of their career through cards.
So which players do you collect, both, as a kid as well as now as an adult?
So for me, back in those hobby world days, right? the first pack I ever opened, like myself, was just a single pack of 96, 97 tops, just the paper cards,
Interesting.
right?
Oh yeah.
And so back in those days, right, like there wasn't the internet either. So then, um, as always, we would just open the packs, then we would just look at the Beckett's and see what's worth the most, right? And
Right.
so I opened it, I was looking through, and then Marbury, like Stephon Marbury, was the most valuable card on Beckett's price guide, which must have at the time been something like $7, right?
Yeah.
But then that meant like you ROI'd, right? So it's like, whoa, because back in those days, like a pack of tops was probably like $1.50, $2. Like the expensive stuff was like 550 for like EX2000 or SPX, right? And the idea of getting two cards in the pack or one card in the pack is kind of insane. Like you gotta be super rich if you want to do that kind of stuff. So that kind of kicked off me just being a big Marbury collector, and he's also like at the time his play style, was super exciting, and like following his career, obviously, his career kind of eventually took him to China, which for me felt like almost like faded, right? Because I'm Chinese, I'm very interested in the country, and so it's been this very fascinating kind of journey to kind of be a part of in a way, right? Because like you follow him year after year, and along the way to try and collect the iconic cards for that year of him. But since then, I would say I've started to kind of expand, beyond basketball, right? So obviously, as an Asian collector, I love collecting things like built out kind of like a Yao Ming collection. These progressively over the years, I think Kobe has been a big part, a big theme, just because I think when I was younger, we all hated Kobe Bryant because we were up here in Northern California, right? We can't really
Right.
support him. But I think over time, it's like he in my life, right, in many ways transcended sports. Just like his intensity, like the way he loves his craft, I think was just a big part. I was like, that's cool. I'm all about that. I really like that. So, I'm going to start trying to build that out. But of course, like the Kobe collecting is a bit difficult these days in terms of price point. But then yeah, so it's a lot of that. But then yeah, Pokemon cards have been a big thing. Magic cards even more so. At the end of the day, yeah, I still live very much on the collector side of things, but I like collect what I like, right? I'm essentially, long story short, buying back my childhood. Like all the cards I heard of that I couldn't get, like I buy.
I see. I see. Yeah, it must be nice. Like a kid in the candy shop, but now you have money to go back and like buy every candy you want, right?
Correct. And that's the weird thing, that in other cases when you kind of go nuts and you have like an addiction, usually at some point like you overdose on it and then you kind of like fall out of love. You're just like, oh, I'm hungover. Like I don't want to do this. But I mean, it's been decades now, and like from 97, right, from 96 to now, it's been now 26 years, right? And I'm not tired of it. So in a way, it's kind of even more dangerous. It's like it gets more expensive, but it's still equally as appealing, if not more appealing than it's ever been to me.
Yeah, it's like for some reason, no, same thing about me. Like I was telling my friend the other day, like I can't count a single person on my hand who has left the hobby.
Yeah.
Everyone, I like, I know hundreds, if not thousands of people that I have talked to. Um, People will make posts on Facebook. They're like, "Oh, I'm leaving the hobby. I need something came up. You need to sell the cards." You see them back like a few weeks, few days, or a few weeks later.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen a single person just like fully quit, which is pretty insane. Pretty insane for me.
Yeah.
Um, what's your favorite part about collecting Kobe's? Do you collect autos? Do you collect inserts? What do you like about
So I do
Kobe's?
like collecting like obscure Kobe autos. It's just like the style, right? Because like he had these different phases in his auto life. Like he signed basically like in a messier, almost can't read it, like full name early in his career.
Yep.
Later, more recently, it's just a single Kobe. But I mean, I like it. I love when he signs things off standard, like when he writes Black Mamba, or when
Yeah.
he writes like finals like of this year, like and those I think are quite cool. Just because I think yeah he's one of those. I always say he's like essentially like a deity, like he's like religion level, right, in places like China. And so anything that really makes it feel like you kind of have a something that intersected with him, like I think is really, really special, which is kind of another reason I think me personally, I mean, his on sticker autos are fine, but like I think there's still that kind of disconnect, like a piece of a weirder piece I have is his middle school classmates signed yearbook with Kobe in it.
His middle
Um,
school.
like his middle school classmate, yeah, like his yearbook, but
Yeah.
then like Kobe just like signed like a message to
Oh,
him.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, he's like, oh, like try harder next year. Like you'll get them. Like you're still a good basketball player, like Kobe Bryant.
That's crazy. So like his middle school classmate was signing it, or Kobe was signing. Kobe signed it, right?
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? It's like
Kobe
when I
was
see
encouraging
that,
his friend, right?
people are like, why would you have Kobe's friend? Well, if you think about it, if you get Kobe's yearbook, Kobe doesn't, he's not gonna sign his own yearbook, right? So then you
Right.
just get his so it basically was like a lawyer out here in LA who was a classmate of his in middle school. And so he, still had like this perfectly kind of conditioned yearbook, but then just with like Kobe's, like a little dedication to this guy, like in the yearbook.
That's really, really cool.
And obviously there's like these very interesting, right? Like I don't think actually they're even on the internet, just like pictures of Kobe Bryant, like, as like a 11-year-old, 12-year-old. So
Yeah,
um
pretty crazy.
yeah.
Random aside, I remember a few years ago I was on Facebook and um, have you seen that photo of like Kobe Bryant practicing free throws with the cast on his arm? He's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
shooting.
yeah. Yep.
Someone was selling his signed cast, like that exact cast on Facebook.
Oh my gosh. That's definitely something I would buy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely. I think in my own collection, my own like personal PC tastes are just like, yeah, these unusual objects that
Right.
give me a feeling of the story of this person's life, you know?
Yeah. I mean that's like a true like one of one. It's like very. It's like you see the photo. I've probably seen that photo of him practicing free throws in like 10 people's Facebook cover photos.
Yeah.
I was like this close to buying it, but I was like, yeah, do I really need it? It's like kind of gross.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
didn't end up buying it.
yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty. If it pops up again, I'll definitely let you know if I see it.
Oh, for
That was
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
that was insane. Yeah, but it's funny that you mentioned that because Eric, we had last week we had Eric Myers on, and he also
Yeah,
mentioned the same thing. He's like, Kobe has different autos, the ones with the eights, the one with the full
yeah.
name, messy name, different inscriptions. What's your favorite inscription?
Oh, I mean, it's still the classic. It's like Black Mamba, I think.
The Black Mamba.
But I've seen it in different variants. I've seen him spell it out, and I've seen him write like BLK, like kind of like
Yeah,
abbreviate it. But yeah, like the ones I think that are the really, really nice are I think like like fully written out, kind of just under his name. Kind of you would imagine if you were to write it out in a uh almost like in the bottom of a letter, Other than that, I would say uh stylistic wise, like in terms of just like, yeah, those different Kobe eras, I love the 8. Maybe it's the Asian in me, but it's like when he just writes Kobe and then 8, like, at the end of the day, I'm still gonna, as much as I understand, like, yeah, if you get like some serial number, like 24 out of 99, it's like, cool, Kobe 101, whatever jersey number. But to me, it's the 8. It's like, that's his number. So,
yeah. I've always thought that was really cool. I feel like a lot of collectors they don't really appreciate it or like see the difference.
yeah,
So I think yeah, I agree. That's really really cool. I also really like the Mamba Out inscription. I haven't seen it like too many places,
yeah,
um, but I've seen I've seen like one or two of them. Uh,
yeah,
but I think like compared to like the LeBron ones, like in '03 LeBron rookie ones, there's a bunch of like weird ones like Naismith Award winner, All Star something, like a bunch of
yeah.
weird ones. I like the Kobe ones a lot more. They're like a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, for sure. And I to a certain extent, I even personally like, yeah, his like early stage autos, right? Like the scoreboard autos that are like the messy full name, just because it's kind of like, especially in this day and age, right? Like, no offense to the I guess you guys, everyone will know, like these recent rookies, right? That sign, and it's hard to tell, right? Like when you can't tell a difference between like Miles Bridges auto and like LaMelo's auto, or you can't tell like Cole Anthony's auto versus Kobe White because it's the same like circular squiggle.
Yeah,
Um, it's like something to appreciate that, like as messy as it is, Kobe's early stage autos, he attempted to write his full name. And it's kind of like this messiness that wasn't like, it's not objectively beautiful. Like in recent memory, if you've ever seen Admiral Schofield's like auto, like from Zion's Ear, he writes in like this beautiful cursive, like it's like this like professional calligraphy guy
Oh,
almost.
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Actually. Yeah.
So I give him I like him as a person just for somebody who went out of his way to do that. But then Kobe's, I think it's kind of in this day and age when people are so like lackluster, it's just pay me and I sign. It's cool to see those days when like to see, I guess what I call inefficient autos.
Right.
Like you wouldn't sign that way if you're just trying to get over it, but you're actually genuinely trying to sign it. At least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, like he actually cared. Right.
Yeah.
There's that video of him signing like the Eminence set where he talks about like every single moment on the card.
Yeah.
Like you could tell that he actually cared for the person on the other side who was opening the box. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just some sort of like contract for him.
That one, I'm sure, like that one, I think yeah, I remember that was a PTSD because people, I think, just including me, just hated how they slid the cards to him.
Oh yeah,
just like, oh my gosh, surface, like, oh my god, don't do that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let's take a change of course here.
Yeah,
I think your background is really interesting because you have a lot of experience dealing with collectors and investors in China,
yeah,
having lived there recently.
yeah.
Can you give us kind of an overview of like what the Chinese market was like? I guess like noticeably like what the biggest like cultural shock was when you started talking with collectors there versus like collectors such as me who have never dealt with physically been in China to like do cards there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first one that pops up to mind, right, is really the level of like while the number of collectors in China, I would wager, is not as large objectively as what is in even America by itself. That being said, I think that the biggest first shock to me was that the collectors that really do enjoy it, of which kind of I would say a lot of them started in Hong Kong, Taiwan, just because I think that was easier to get product for the last decade or so, but that they're equally as, I guess, what you and I probably would know in a lot of the hobby, right? Like have taste, meaning that they're not just like blindly collecting like, oh, a Jordan 10 here, or oh, like some other like iconic card that the market you just see all the time, right? Like, but rather they love certain inserts. They love certain cards, like base cards, purely based on the photo that it's depicting. So that was one really cool thing to see. But then within that, it's cool to see that a lot of other, you would say, like normal hobby rules weren't as strict to a lot of the collectors that I've seen. For example, they'll collect people when they've done significant things in that year. So it wasn't that like specific, oh, I'm just obsessed with either rookies or RPAs, or that's it. Like anything beyond that, like they're not particularly interested. But in this case, like I've seen people like, that really loved collecting like McGrady. Obviously McGrady's big in China anyways, but like that year, he scored the 13 points, right? Like in a super short amount of time. They'll like either scour to look for, cards of that photo. They'll look for that year of cards. And so in a way, it's like, it's cool because in this different country that I'm sure we'll talk about, which is disconnected in some regards, like informationally to the States, that is bad in many ways. But then the good ways is that it lets them kind of almost set a little bit of their own rules, right? Like in terms of what's cool to collect. And then of course, right, like the whole explosive market for Chinese players, whether it's like Yao Ming, Jeremy Lin, Wang Zhizhi, like, I think interestingly enough, in his year's class, right, he's the most valuable rookie right now. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah. And you can imagine it's just because his fan base here is so big, or it's Ochi now. And so, yeah, obviously it's still a big market, Marbury included, right? Like big Chinese market. And it's really cool for my own purposes. Like I said, back in collecting in 96, that back in 96, I remember the one everyone wanted was Iverson. Like, and while, that power ranking is shifted over to Kobe in such a big way, Iverson still gets huge love, right, in the Chinese markets. And there's so many collectors out there for him. So I would say, yeah, like the biggest thing, long story short, is really just almost adjusted tastes, and learning that is really cool. Because sometimes being out in the US market, it's like, yeah, I really wish, right, even from a don't waste card standpoint, that people would collect on different parameters rather than everyone's just trying to get the exact same card, right? Of every player.
Yeah, the point that you make about case is really interesting. I feel like, when you're at a show like Dallas in America, it seems like there's almost like this hive mind mentality, right? Like NT is the best, on card always trumps stickers. The pose doesn't really matter. Like shape of the Luca auto matters because mom versus not mom, right? Kind of like stuff like that, where like people, it's just like cards just become an asset, or like dollar signs instead of just like something that's truly truly collectible. So that's really really interesting. Have you ever been to a show in China, or do you have any insight into
So
like what
yeah,
shows look
I
like, if at
have.
all?
So I have yet to be at like physical shows, but then seen obviously like plenty of like group, kind of in-person group breaks, like been to the LCSs, interacted obviously with a lot of like the KOL influencers in the country. But
What
I
does
think a
KOL
lot of it.
mean?
Oh, sorry.
What does KOL mean?
Oh, KOL meaning influencers, like
Oh, okay.
knowledge and opinion leaders. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Knowledge. Okay, I see.
Yeah. So obviously just like the Spinatron of China, or Eric Myers or whoever, that really kind of are big kind of contributors to the hobby. And I mean, yeah, it's these people that, to the point you just said, right? I think the same way that I think in China, like people really looked at like jade, or they looked at kind of like those like stones in like Chinese gardens, right? It's
Yeah.
like the shape and the form is matters, right? So it's not just like, it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's a three patch, like it's a 3-color patch. It's like, oh, well, does it have curvature? Does it have geometry? Does it have, it gets to that point. So it's nice to see, right, that people can get really that intense about it, because I think that's when, things, I think as you get deeper into the hobby, that's when it starts to get fun. It's all in the details.
Yeah. I mean, like, well, I mean, I feel like in America, like like people kind of just look at an RPA or something and they're like, oh, 3 colors, 4 colors. But then, I saw like, in some of Spinatron's posts, he actually counts like, how many times the color changes,
Yeah.
the stitching in the patch, like what part it comes from, what type of jersey it comes from, right? Like that's, I think there's a level of sophistication that like, I feel like takes a little bit more time to understand, but, it is like very, very valuable to get in the long run. What was your experience going to an LCS in China like?
Oh, so I mean, I think that like in China, I think one like the number one thing, right, that they'll complain about in the LCS, and you hear all of them say it. They'll just say like lack of product. Like it's almost like I walk in and I'm like asking about stuff. And I'm like, I'm from the States. Even before like I ever bought anything, right? This was like in Beijing. Even before I even bought like a single box, the first question they're like kind of asking is like, oh, can you like help us get
Yep,
product from the States?
yep. I've
So
gotten that a lot too.
so it's like, and so that's, I mean, that's an opportunity, just even that stands to this day. It's just the demand is insatiable, right?
What's the bottleneck
Uh,
for getting product to China?
the what?
What do you think the bottleneck is for getting like?
Oh, the bottleneck right now, I mean, there's two big ones, right? And I think they're kind of like the twin pillars. One is like just moving large amounts of money from China to US is not easy. There's a lot of capital control restrictions. And so you can imagine, like, that's why if you see a lot of LCSs, even in China, they're all based in like Guangzhou, or basically southern China. And that's because the product is coming in via Taiwan or coming in via Hong Kong, like through these kind of like southern entry points, right? And so in a way, it's like just directly Chinese, straight up in Beijing or in Shanghai, get something from a distributor out in the US, like that's a big barrier. And it's hard, kind of, you could say, like monetary wise. And then two, the big thing is from my understanding is that a lot of like the biggest distributors aren't like, whether you're Panini directly or you're like GTS, a lot of their like big kind of supply has already been locked up and given to the in a way spoken for to these existing kind of like old, very long time established relationships. There are people like Roika, like Fans Mall, that I think, credit to them, they've been OGs, right? They've been doing this for like decades or more. But even then, like in all this time of loyalty, they're still considered, like in terms of the big picture of who gets what distribution, right? Like they're not getting the lion's share, So I mean, that's kind of the other big kind of thing that holds them back. And then in terms of just like, yeah, just bringing in the product though, I think sometimes the lag is too slow these days, especially now, right? You want to bring in stuff, it might take like over a month. But then as we know, especially since so much of it is consumed by the breaker market, like you want it now, like you want first off the line when it's first off the line. But if you get first off the line in China, it's probably like, after all of the non for FOTLs are ripped open, logo mans are already discovered, then it's like these things finally get into port. So it's a bit of a letdown in that sense. And that's why I'm sure you'll see way more and more Chinese names, like Chinese characters pop up in Leighton or Platinum or Steel City, because this is kind of the only way to kind of get, that first plug in, in a timely way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it would make sense for a lot of these Chinese breakers to have operations in America. But if they're already joining these larger American companies, breaks, then they don't actually need the cards to. They don't need the case to go to China, right? It's a lot more efficient to just ship the individual hits rather than the actual cases. I
For
also
sure.
feel like customs is also a huge issue, right? Like, if a distributor were to send like 5 cases of FOTL,
Yeah.
it might get held in customs, and then if it never gets there, like who's that? It's the shipper's responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if I just ship the package to Montana, I know it's going to get there in a few days, right?
Oh,
Without it getting
definitely.
seized by anyone.
And exactly to that point, I think that customs is super sensitive, right? And I think I'm a big believer that the China market hasn't reached this kind of like hyperbolic super explosion of the hobby, right? Like it has in the US in the last couple of years, and when it does, yeah, you're going to have tighter government controls, right? People are going to know what they see when they see like the words Panini National Treasures. Whereas right now, like most customs agents probably don't know what they're looking at, right? It's just cardboard. But to your point about like also the customs thing is if things go wrong, another big barrier, I would, unfortunate to say, but I have to keep it real in this regard, right? There is already an inherent distrust between a lot of America and China.
Right.
So if things slow down, if things go wrong, there's not this like, leeway for both parties oftentimes to be like, you know what, like this system messed up. It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's more just like, oh, shade, these people are shady or that person's shady. And when I talk to, everyone from like the high-end auctioneers to, the big kind of wax sellers out in the States, when I ask them, like, do you do business out in China? They're like, oh yeah, China's amazing. And I was like, do you have an office? They're like, no. Right. And then you ask them why, they're like, it's just too complicated. Right.
Yeah.
And that's usually code word for hard to trust, or if you don't speak the language, yeah, definitely it's hard to trust. It'd be hard to trust for anybody like that. So those things are barriers that I wish were broken down in some way, right? Because the hobby should, create more of a bridge. Like I fully believe that.
So right now we've talked about kind of like bridges in terms of like wax getting product across borders. Are there any other bridges that you think could be crossed between like international markets?
Yeah, I mean, like the
doesn't
wax
necessarily have to be China.
Yeah, so the other side really is the high end like auction. So when I look at someone like a Golden, for example, Golden or Heritage or PWCC, these guys, right? Like if you just look at the traffic that's going to them, it's still very like America centric, right? Like of course you'll get a little bit of other countries, but then the thing is that the high end market, I mean, there's big ballers and big whales everywhere in the world, China included, but their access to these websites are not as easy. And so, in a way, it's like there are these collector bases. And like we said, in China, it's definitely there, but then they're really hamstrung in participating in these auctions, right? And even the time zones are screwed, right? Like it's already a pain in the butt to like for an American to participate in an auction, especially with like the 30-minute like increase or just like live bidding procedures, right? But man, if you're Chinese, like you got to really kind of stay up, you got to wake up at 5 probably, right, in AM and just to participate in an auction. So, I mean, I think that the auction, like the liquidity points definitely need to get improved for sure. And then furthermore, safety. For everything that we just talked about, like, of course there's Chinese, Taiwanese, Latin American, European, like eBay sellers. But then I think again, like, even when I am looking at these listings, sometimes I feel nervous because I'm like, oh my gosh, like shipping's really expensive. I don't know if it's any safer. If it doesn't get here, if there's problems I need to return, it's just very prohibitive. Right. And I think that reduces a lot, that creates a lot of friction that I think is unnecessary. And then finally, I think I think like a lot of things like pricing data and things like that, like these other countries don't have as readily of access to. So in a way, it's like we're operating on different pieces of information. I remember back in the day, a lot of people in China used to tell me that in order for them to get the full suite of comps available to them, right, they need a VPN. And so if like it's not working for you, or like if you have trouble accessing certain sites, then yeah, like you're kind of out of luck, right? You're kind of taking the other person's word for it. So, if places like Card Ladder or otherwise, right, like have more of like a global appeal, maybe just localize, translate their UI. I think that would be a big service as well. And this
Yeah,
is not
no,
even to mention trading, right?
right.
Trading, oh my gosh, don't even think about it, right? Like,
Yeah, no kidding.
so that's crazy. Yeah. But if you could do that, so in my opinion, actually about trading is I think trading, when we talk about this lack of trust, I think the smallest, if we just go back to solving this, how do you solve it? I think go back to when we were kids, like the easiest way to engage with the community is through trades. Because like you don't have, you just need cards to trade. And so you just swap with each other. And that act of swapping will, create these relationships that really kind of form that bridge over time, And so the unfortunate part of international markets is it's just so hard to facilitate that trade. So of course, that's another potential, you could say, to keep the metaphor, construction material that you could use to build the bridge that isn't available as readily.
Yeah, I think a part of the missing puzzle is also just like shows with a lot of international collectors, right? Like previously, a lot of international collectors would like come to the national, and that would help build that initial trust, which would then
Yeah.
spiral into potential trade throughout the rest of the year. But now, since we haven't had a national with a lot of international collectors, that has kind of slowed down a little bit. But I'm optimistic for like the next national where I've heard stories of like more collectors from Korea, from China coming. Like I remember like my first national in 2019. There was a group of guys from Shanghai, and like I asked them to see their cards, and they're like, "No, we actually don't have any. We're just here to buy
Yeah.
stuff."
Yeah.
Like they have no intention of selling anything. They're just true collectors that really want to buy cards, and so if they have a card they really want, maybe they'll trade part of their PC for like a more key PC item. But that's always been super super interesting to me. Uh, cool. Also, we are running short on time, but it was great having you, Gary.
Yeah.
Gary, kind of like your background in the hobby growing up as a kid, as well as kind of your insights on what it's like to, the market in China. I think a lot of people don't really have firsthand experience into that. So I guess for followers who are interested in learning a little bit more about you, or just want to reach out with any questions, what are some ways that they can reach out to you?
Yeah. I mean, definitely reach out to me on Instagram. It's Gary.Mao. So Gary.Mao. I really should start posting like my collection up there. So I got to get to that. So you're just going to see some like random pictures of me, kind of my travels in a way, in a different life. But yeah, just reach out to me there. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time today, Gary.
Yeah. No, loved it. Thank you for inviting me.
Anytime.